clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good morning to you all. Happy New Year's. This is New Year's Eve. Wishing you all peace and blessings for 2025. Reuters reported on Monday, the United States announced nearly $6 billion. Yes, that's $1 billion in additional military and budgetary assistance for Ukraine as President Joe Biden uses his final weeks in office to surge aid to Kiev before President-elect Donald Trump takes power. In the words of a brilliant journalist, Bryant Gumbel, why? What if the stories you've been told, the ones you thought you understood, were crafted to influence you in ways that you never imagined? Let's explore the power of propaganda, the shaping of global narratives, and how the information we're fed often becomes the foundations of what we believe. Let's connect these dots.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Good morning, and again, Happy New Year to you all. It is New Year's Eve. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issues before us are: is the power of propaganda and the shaping of global narratives impacting your reality, from the conflict in Ukraine to the conflict in historic Palestine? Let's discuss this with my guest. He's an American living in Crimea, a filmmaker and documentarian. His acclaimed documentary is Who Are These Russians and Why Do We Hate Them? Regis Tremblay. Regis, welcome.
Wilmer, Happy New Year. Thanks for the invitation here on New Year's Eve.
Hey, man.
It's always a pleasure and honor to be with you.
And thank you so much for giving us time today. It's a little late in the evening for you, so we greatly appreciate you fitting us into your schedule. Usually when I have discussions of this nature, I like to start with the first few paragraphs from the book, Propaganda. It was a book written by an American pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda. Many believe him to be the godfather of public relations and propaganda. Edward Bernays. His work, for example, for the United Fruit Company in the 1950s was connected with the CIA orchestrated overthrow of the democratically elected Guatemalan government in 1954. He was also Sigmund Freud's nephew. Let me read a couple paragraphs from the first chapter, Organizing Chaos. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we've never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. Our invisible governors are, in many cases, unaware of the identity of their fellow members in the inner cabinet. Regis, as we examine Joe Biden sending nearly $6 billion in additional military and budgetary assistance for Ukraine, can you connect some dots between this and your documentary film, Who Are These Russians and Why Do We Hate Them?
Well, Wilmer, I made that film in 2019. I had traveled to Russia since 2016 and again in 2018 and 2019. And what I completely understood was the power of propaganda, how my American friends, compatriots, family have been completely brainwashed, indoctrinated with this hatred for and anxiety about all things Russian. And what I had discovered, and this is why I came to Russia, because I no longer believed the propaganda and the lies of my government, of our educational system, of our history books. And I had to come to Russia to find out for myself what these Russians were really like. And what I discovered is the Russians are just like us. The Russians love their families. They love their tradition, their children. They love their history. And they want nothing but peace and prosperity. And what I discovered, and I firmly believe to this day, is the Russians are not our enemy. Now, in the film that you mentioned, Who Are These Russians and Why Do We Hate Them? It was really a look at historical facts, really dating back since World War II, when Churchill and Harry Truman really were afraid of Russia and actually had planned to nuke several Russian cities. Thank God that didn't happen. But ever since that time, and especially the time of Ronald Reagan, who did more than anybody to demonize Russia as the evil empire, a soulless, godless nation built on destroying family and family life and religion around the world during that Soviet era. And every president since then has had a very contentious relationship in their foreign policy with Russia. 1991, when promises were made to the president of Russia, Gorbachev, that NATO would not move 1 inch towards Russia, that promise was immediately broken by Bill Clinton. And since that time, NATO is expanded to many of the former Soviet republics and all along Russia's borders. Now, in that film, one of the most important things that I pointed out, and this is connecting the dots, Wilmer, in my opinion, Donald Trump went to Helsinki, Finland on July 16th, 2018, to meet with Vladimir Putin. It only can be described as a love fest. Everything was looking up. Relationships were being repaired. There was great hope expressed in both Putin's comments at their press conference and by Donald Trump. I was very hopeful, but no sooner did Trump board his plane to return to the United States was he condemned roundly. He was accused by John Brennan of high crimes and misdemeanors, of treason. On the front pages of American media, he was described as Putin's poodle, as having committed treason. And it was almost immediately, Wilmer, because of the pressure that was put on Trump, that he shifted 180 degrees in his policies towards Russia. Now, why do Americans hate Russians? Wilma, this goes back generations and even centuries. The West has always vacillated between a real interest in Russia and vacillated between a fear of Russia. Way before communism, they have always feared that Russia was different, described many times as somewhat less than human, these Slavic peoples. And you look at the period that the Swedes invaded Russia many times. Why? Because of its vast resources. You look at Napoleon, who invaded Russia for the same reason, to conquer it, break it up, and steal its resources. That was the case in World War II with the German Wehrmacht. The Nazis attempted to break up and steal Russia's resources, but Russia prevailed in that great patriotic war. This is embedded in the Russian mentality and psyche today. They have been invaded for centuries by outsiders. They have been treated as less than human. Now, if we fast forward to today, isn't this the way the rest of the world, especially the West, I don't mean the rest of the world, the West and the United States looks at Russia as a threat, as people that is somewhat less than human? And why do they hate them when they don't even know them? I will end this piece on this particular note, Wilmer. What I have discovered in the years that I've been coming here, in the 5 years that I've been living here, the Russian culture is incredible. Russian history, Russian art, Russian music, Russian sports have been such an important part of this country and these people for generations. It's a much richer country culturally than the United States. It equals that of any country in Western Europe. I have been so embarrassed as what I thought was a well-educated American for how shallow my education and our education has been. So why is it that the United States and Western Europe are so afraid of Russia and hate Russia? It can't be because they're worried that modern day Russia, since Putin took office in the year 2000, 25 years ago, he's never once threatened any Western country. He's never invaded any country in Western Europe. Russia has only been begging for respect and for peace, and Putin wanted to be included into NATO and the EU, and he was rejected roundly. And so to get back to your point when you began, propaganda, Edward Bernays, the American people have been sold the image of Russia as a violent pagan country. I have lost friends, family, relatives, classmates that go back 25, 30 years because of the ingrained, indoctrinated message about Russia being our enemy, as Russia being bad, Putin is bad. And unfortunately, that propaganda has been incredibly successful when all Americans believe, the vast majority that is, that Russia and Putin are bad.
There are two points that I'd like to pick up on that you just made. We don't have to dwell on them because you were so clear in what you said, but I want to reiterate. One is the reference to Russians as Slavic or Slavs. A lot of people don't really understand. A lot of people in the West don't understand that Russians, by European standards, Russians are not considered white. They are not considered European. They are considered Slavs, S-L-A-V. Hence, if you look at the, I'm trying to remember the words you use for the look at the word slave. That's where that comes from. And the other point is, if you want to try to get some understanding, and in fact, let me just say this quickly, folks. This is not a pro-Russia, anti-Russia conversation. And so don't get this twisted. This is just a factual discussion about the country. And you can take from it or do with it whatever you choose to. One of the things I think that has a dramatic impact on the Russian psyche, you mentioned World War II. The Russians lost almost 9 million soldiers in World War II. 9 million soldiers. In fact, many will tell you the West could not have won World War II without the Russian army matching up against the Germans. They lost 27 million people in World War II. 27 million people, 9 million soldiers, compared to the United States having lost, I believe, around 408,000 soldiers. So when you compare a loss of 408,000 on the U.S. side to 9 million soldiers on the Russian side, you can get an idea of why they're so sensitive to NATO surrounding their country with missiles. Regis.
Well,
is that right?
Yeah. There's no more peaceful people in the world than the Russian people because of what you just mentioned. 27 million people died defending the motherland. I emphasize defending their country. They were not the aggressors. They were the victims. And the Russian people deserve historically the respect and the acknowledgement that it was the Soviet Red Army,
correct,
that defeated Hitler and the Nazi onslaught. The majority of the Wehrmacht had been concentrated on Russian land. And so it was an easy walk, we must be truthful, for the United States and its Western allies, to walk right through Europe, through Africa, through Sicily, all the way up. And it was the Russians, the Red Army, the Soviet Army, that entered Berlin first. The United States and the West have always claimed that they won World War II and defeated the Nazis. That is a historical lie, a misrepresentation of the largest proportions. Russia has never the Soviet Union was never given credit for achieving that victory at an enormous price, which you mentioned. 27 million people died and perished in that war. So, Wilmer, I have to tell you, the memory of that war and the losses of people, the losses of infrastructure, the losses of churches and schools is only one generation really away from their consciousness. They are completely aware that this was not some remote event. This happened to their parents and their grandparents. They all have stories about these memories. And so this is where we are today. Russia has been trying to overcome the rewriting, the revisionism of history. And Russia has been trying to overcome the memory of the Soviet era, when Russia did try to expand. Communism, workers of the world unite, we're going to take over, the domino theory, boom, 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 all over Asia and then everywhere else. That is no longer the ideology of the Russian Federation of the last 25 years. Unfortunately, that is one of the biggest obstacles to people in the West to accepting Russia as one that wanted peace, that one that wanted part of the European Security Network, NATO, that wanted to be a member of Europe, the EU, and they were rejected. And they're rejected again today.
Final point from a historical perspective before we get into an update on where we are in terms of the Ukraine and the weight and how much money the United States is wasting on that front. And that is, as I try to talk to people about this and connect some dots and put it in some true historic context. This is also a matter of imperialism versus anti-imperialism. The West, the United States, is an imperialist force. To the point that you made earlier, Russia hasn't invaded anybody. Russia did not invade Ukraine. Russia lost those 9 million soldiers defending their territory, their sovereignty against invasion. Russia worked with Algeria and other countries on the African continent, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism. That's been their effort, not globalization, global hegemony. Hence, we're moving from the unipolar world that the United States has been in control of since World War II to a multipolar world. That's what this is really about from an ideological perspective. Regis Tremblay.
Well, Wilmer, I'm really glad you brought that up because, we could talk about the war in Ukraine. Did Russia invade? Did Russia have a right to defend its national security interests, to defend the Russian people, the Russian language, the Russian culture existing in Ukraine?
The Russian church?
The Russian church, the Orthodox Church. We can talk about Israel, the United States involvement in the genocide in Israel. But what I've been focusing on, and what I think we have to focus on, is this new world order that is already here. It's emerging.
And it's not, wait a minute, Regis. And it's not, folks, don't get this twisted. This is not George H.W. Bush's new world order. This is truly a new world order.
And I would add this, Wilmer. It's another reason why President Putin is really hated and despised is because he and the Russian Federation, more than China, more than India, more than any other country, have been promoting this new multipolar world in the form of the BRICS movement, the BRICS Plus movement now, with 30 or 40 other countries wanting to either belong or become partners with. It represents some 40% of the entire planet. Russia has been leading this movement, and what it's based on, Wilmer, is the antithesis of the United States rules-based order. Do what we say, or you're going to get punished. It's based on the sovereignty of all nations, the respect of all nations, large and small. It's based on the strict observance of international law and the principles of the UN Charter. And this movement is growing exponentially, very quickly. Most people are not focused on it. Donald Trump is. And why is Trump focused on it? Because he sees it as the greatest threat to the American dollar. Because the people in the BRICS movement have already been doing trade in their own currencies. They have already set up their equivalent of the International Monetary Fund, investment bank. They are making investments. When I say they, Russia, China, India, Saudi Arabia are involved in making investments in the global south, in East Asia, in Africa. And so this movement, which is being led by Russia and President Putin, they had their huge meeting in Kazan here in the Russian Federation a month ago, and there were like 20,000 people there. Representatives, prime ministers, presidents from other countries, all participating with the hope that this movement would quickly move into a new world order based on the principles that I've just been mentioning. And this is another reason why Russia, China, India are being targeted by the United States of America because of their imperialism, because of the need of the United States to preserve its hegemony, its domination of the entire world. And this movement is the antithesis of that. This can't be talked about enough, in my opinion, Wilmer. We're being distracted by Ukraine, by Israel. We're being distracted by the threats of the United States against China and North Korea. This is the most important happening in the world today. And I have said this in this way. Will the United States, recognizing it has lost its attempt, its epic battle to maintain its hegemony in the world, either recognizing its place as one amongst equals, or will they take the whole world down with them in a nuclear Armageddon? We've heard enough of this nuclear gaslighting in the past year to have everybody worried that that might happen.
And the word I was struggling for a while ago was etymology, the study of words, the study of language. And what I was trying to get to, when you look at the etymology of the word slave or Slavic, that's where SLA, that's where it comes from. So let's move now to where we are. $6 billion additional dollars, some of that money being military and some military equipment, military hardware, some of that money being operational money for the Ukrainian government to function. What a lot of people don't understand is Ukraine lost this a long time ago. They're done. They're out of soldiers. They're out of weapons. It's the United States and NATO that is engaged in this fight against Russia on Ukrainian soil. The Ukrainians have had to go into their prisons and release prisoners, send them to the meat grinder on the front line. They have press gangs that are roaming the countryside, kidnapping young men of age, sending them to the front line, to the meat grinder. They're out of soldiers, they're out of bullets, they're out of artillery, they're out of tanks, they're out, period. Regis, is that hyperbole on my part?
Well, it's certainly not hyperbole, and I'm going to leave it as you just said. I don't have anything to add to that, except I want to reiterate, it's a recent, I don't know how many $billion, $6 billion, that's just a frantic attempt, a last gasp of the neocon, the Zionist in the White House, to prop up Ukraine, to make it even more difficult for Donald Trump, number one, to make peace within 24 hours, but going forward as a foreign policy directive. This was the whole point of that. But what I want to hopefully will make people understand, it's been estimated that the United States and NATO have pumped in something like $300 billion since the Maidan in 2022 into Ukraine. This is not a proxy war. This is a direct war between the United States and Russia, as you mentioned, on the playground of Ukraine. The stated goal of the United States, out of the mouths of Joseph Biden, Anthony Blinken, General Austin, Lloyd Austin, has been, the goal is the strategic defeat of Russia. It can't be any more clear.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot be clearer that this is the goal of the United States, is to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Now, we can talk about what Russians think about this, the people, what the Kremlin, Putin, his advisors, they know exactly what's going on. But of those $300 billion, this is where the money's been going. Yes, it has been to prop up and pay the government of Ukraine. Ukraine is bankrupt. Without this aid, they can't have anything functioning in their country, from legislation, from infrastructure, from the electrical grid. These are all people who have to be paid, from the railroads, from taking care of the highways and social services. All of this money has come from the West. How many billions? A lot. Another part of where this money has gone is into corruption. The pockets of Zelensky and some oligarchs and these corrupt people around him, that's where it's gone. It's gone into military hardware. But the thing about military hardware that people don't understand is Ukraine's been selling it on the black market. Where has this stuff been ending up? Is it ending up in the Middle East? Is it ending up in Southeast Asia? Is it ending up in Africa? The fingerprints of Ukraine are all over what I've just mentioned. And finally, what I think is important for people to understand is Ukraine has been losing the war of attrition. Not only have they lost, really, it's estimated over 1 million soldiers killed and maimed for life, they have lost military hardware, the best that the United States and NATO could give them, by the thousands. And what people need to understand is that Russia also has lost thousands of lives. We don't know how many, but they've lost thousands of lives. But what Russia is doing now is, for the last 6 months at least, have intensified their missile attacks, their drone attacks, their aerial bombardments all over Ukraine, all the way from Odessa to Lvov, including Kiev. They have destroyed infrastructure, not civilian properties, not civilian residences, but infrastructure, electrical grids, and transportation to impact the ability of Ukraine and NATO and the United States to continue this war of aggression against Russia. You mentioned it's over. It's been over for quite some time. Now, Wilmer, there's only, 20 days now before Donald Trump takes office? What is going to happen in these next 20 days in Ukraine? This is another important point that I would like to emphasize on this show. Russia has made it clear there's no negotiation with any of the territory that they have captured, including Crimea. They have stated emphatically that the situation on the ground is where we begin talking, if we do begin talking.
Mm-hmm.
And just in the last few days, some new language has been added by Putin and Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. Both of them hearkened back to broken promises that have to be resolved going back to 1991, with NATO would not move 1 inch closer to Russia, going back to 2022 with the Minsk I and the Minsk II agreements that were broken, that Russia was lied to. These statements have just been made. They're now part of the calculus that Donald Trump and his advisors are going to have to deal with. Russia wants to resolve these broken promises. Russia wants to guarantee its security. They have begged for that. In December of 2021, they sent this message to the United States and NATO that we only want you to agree to our basic security needs. It was dismissed. It was not even acknowledged. And so what is really going to happen in terms of Ukraine? Donald Trump doesn't have a plan. And not only that, he's not able,
Correct,
nor is the United States able to do anything to prevent Russia from accomplishing all of its goals. And I will mention the three main ones. The demilitarization. That means no Ukrainian army. That means no NATO. That means no mercenaries. Number two, the denazification of Ukraine. That's the second major goal. What is that going to involve? It's going to involve cleaning out all of the Nazi ideology in Kiev, in the government, including Zelensky and all of his followers. And it's going to involve a multi-generational education, re-education program to drive out this Bandera Nazi ideology that has grown up and has captivated this country. And the third goal, Russia will not negotiate on this, is a completely neutral Ukraine with no NATO, never, no NATO. Those are non-negotiable. So what does Trump and the West have to talk about when they want to talk about a diplomatic solution? There isn't going to be a diplomatic solution. There's going to be a complete and total surrender dictated by the terms of the Russian Federation. This is the only possible outcome. And anybody, I think anybody with any common sense, and this is the Russian people, they know that total victory, just like in World War II, is an absolute must to end this conflict.
I've been saying for a while that the United States needs to fire up the USS Missouri, resurrect the USS Missouri, dig up Emperor Hirohito and sail that rascal into the Black Sea, because that's what they're gonna have to go and sign, not a peace deal, but they're gonna have to sign the defeat. They got to throw in the towel. Kevin Baptiste says Putin is showing too much restraint. And I think what's important to understand here, and Kevin, you're not alone. There are a lot of Russian people that believe that President Putin has been showing too much restraint for a very long time. But what I think is not being factored into that analysis, is Russian history. We lost 9 million. He's saying we lost 9 million soldiers in World War II. Don't want to go through that again. He also understands the impact that all-out war has on economies. And right now, the Russian economy, contrary to what Joe Biden told us when this mess started, we're going to turn the ruble into rubble. No, the Russian economy is thriving and doing quite well. And so Putin understands war decimates economy. And he does not want to conflate this to the point of missiles coming closer or deeper and deeper into Russia with an all-out war. So I think people, and final point, and I'll let you respond, Regis, is when you have the long view, when you understand, and this is why we spend so much time talking about Russian history, when you understand the Russian history, when you understand Chinese history, when you understand how old these cultures are compared to the United States, that historic understanding brings a different perspective into your analysis. Regis Tremblay.
Well, very well said. I completely agree. You mentioned Putin has been criticized for being so patient and restrained, even by a lot of Russian people. I've heard it myself from many friends. Putin just admitted at a press conference that he does annually that he probably made a mistake, that he entered the special military operation into Ukraine too late. He waited too long. Now, what about Putin's restraint? He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to accelerate this present situation to the point where it gets out of control. In other words,
accelerate / exacerbate.
Exacerbate, where we're now using tactical nukes, or we're now using nukes all out. Putin does not want to go there. And he doesn't want to go there for the same reasons you just mentioned. He understands he's a product, a child of World War II, of that great patriotic war.
He lost a lot of family. He lost a lot of family during that conflict.
They all did.
Right.
And so, as you correctly mentioned, this is in Putin's mind. This is his history. This is his background. He's coming out of this. Now, there's another reason, and I talked about this extensively just a few minutes ago. Why is Putin being so patient? On a geopolitical level, the BRICS movement, the emergence of a new world order, this can be described as an enormous gamble by Russia and China, particularly, almost exclusively, not the other countries, but Russia and China are the main targets. They are gambling that this emerging world order will be victorious, that this will be the new world order, a world order of peace and security and development for all nations. That's a huge gamble. As I mentioned previously, this is what's at stake. Will the United States, this last imperialist country, recognizing it's lost this battle for the future new order of the world, will it take us all down in a nuclear Armageddon? They're threatening that. Or will sanity prevail somehow, hopefully in 2025, and maybe in the person of Donald Trump, will sanity prevail and recognizing that for the good of the entire planet, for the good of humanity, that the United States will recognize its place in the world order as one among equals. Wilmer, in my mind, this is what really is at stake today as we speak. My question, Wilmer.
Yes.
And I wanted to talk about this because everybody in Russia is wondering about Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
They don't think that he can solve this Ukraine conflict and will solve it. They don't believe that. But many people who are well informed are questioning what Trump might do in the next 4 years in terms of his foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
Will he try to reestablish a relationship with Vladimir Putin, with President Xi of China, with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, with whoever is in charge now in Iran? Will he attempt to do that and to calm things down? And what will Donald Trump do domestically in the United States? These are questions that I have and that the Russians have as we cross over in just a few hours, for me, into 2025. Your thoughts?
I've been asked this question, and everybody, welcome to the Regis Tremblay show. I've been asked this question a number, and Kevin, thank you so much for that super sticker. I get asked this question a lot, and my answer is I don't know. And the reason that I have to say I don't know is for the same reason that President Putin, when asked who would you prefer, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, his answer was Joe Biden, because Donald Trump is too erratic. You mentioned foreign policy. I don't believe Donald Trump has a foreign policy because Donald Trump doesn't have a worldview. Donald Trump is what's the word? He's reactionary, but the word is transactional. He's a transactional individual, which means, to my audience, when I use that term, he operates in the moment based upon the circumstances in front of him. There is no long view here as far as Donald Trump is concerned. Also, as I've been told, because he doesn't have a worldview, a guiding ideology, the last person in his ear is the last thing that the last person says to him in his ear tends to be the thing that Donald Trump goes with. So it's hard for me to predict where any of this is going to go because I don't have any consistent history with Donald Trump to understand if past is prologue, where are you going to take me? I have no idea. Your thoughts?
Well, I almost hesitate to want to go down this rabbit hole, but I think Donald Trump, like everybody before him, are Zionist. They're all,
that's true.
They're all controlled by IPAC. And I make the distinction, I'm not talking about the religious Old Testament Jews. I'm talking about
Correct.
Zionism,
correct,
which is far different. This is an ideology,
a political ideology, not a religious ideology.
Exactly, and it's evil.
Correct.
Its sole purpose is to dominate the entire planet. They have been using the United States as a battering ram to eliminate populations, to exercise control over the entire planet through their banking system and through wars. And Donald Trump is as much a Zionist as George H.W. Bush and the Cowboy Bush and Obama and most everybody before them who are beholding to this Zionist cabal.
And what's important for people to understand right there, Regis, is not all Zionists are Jews and not all Jews are Zionists.
That's a good point of distinction that I think that has to be made.
Mm-hmm.
I would also like to point out that I did a show, one of my own shows, with a very brilliant retired attorney, a woman, on the Zionist influence within Joe Biden's administration and within the United States Congress.
Was that Marjorie Cohn?
Sylvia Demarest.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The number of dual citizen Americans and Israelis in Biden's cabinet is overwhelming. The number of dual citizens in high positions in the United States Senate and Congress is really troubling. And the American people have no idea how deep and powerful this influence has been.
Mm-hmm.
Foreign policy is not determined by Barack Obama, by Joseph Biden, by Donald Trump. It is determined by the Zionist entity that has taken over and held hostage what you and I believe is the American government.
You know, one of the other viewers here, and I'm trying to see, in fact, I might have already mentioned this, talking about the Zionist. Chanel, Putin isn't ruthless like Zionists are. And to that point, I want to go to this. Haaretz calls for Israel to stop attacking Gaza hospitals. In an editorial, the Israeli newspaper acknowledges the real purposes of destroying hospitals in northern Gaza is ethnic cleansing. This is a piece by Dave DeCamp. On Monday, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and folks, that's an Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, published an editorial calling for the Israeli military to stop targeting hospitals in Gaza. It's titled, "Leave Gaza's Hospitals Alone." I was reluctant to bring this up now because we're getting towards the end, and this takes us into a whole nother conversation, which, in fact, I'm going to put you on the spot and see if you can join me on Friday, same time on Friday, so that we can pick up this conversation. But I wanted to, since you were heading in that direction, and Chanel, I'm sorry, made that point. That's in an Israeli newspaper today. Stop bombing hospitals, Regis.
Well, I think this is a good point to end on today, and I'd be happy to join you again whenever you like. I'm retired over here, so Sunday, Monday, Friday, Saturday, it's all the same.
So we're gonna book you. We're gonna, folks, all of you all that are Friday. Regis is my guest on Friday. Go ahead, Regis.
Okay. I wanted to pick up on your comments about that Israeli newspaper editorial. Mm-hmm. There has been so much information coming from Israel itself that indicates that Israel, as a entity, I'm going to call it an entity, illegally formed 1947, is suffering tremendously economically, internally, domestically, politically. Netanyahu is going on trial for corruption. They have sent so many needed workers in Russian businesses, Russian manufacturing, Russian services to the front to fight this war that their economy is in free fall. I've interviewed people on my show who have a great deal of knowledge about what's happening. The ports of Israel are almost empty. Workers have no ships to unload. The Houthis are blocking traffic. And Israel is being attacked. The myth of the Iron Dome has been dispelled. It's being attacked regularly, not only by the Houthis, but by Hezbollah, by even Iran. Mm-hmm. And so Israel's future is something we need to talk about. Israel's future as this entity might be coming to an end for a number of reasons, but they've been isolated completely by the rest of the world who have condemned their ruthless genocidal war on the people of Gaza, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and probably soon their attempts to take down Iran. They're pariah now in the world. And so I'll leave my comments at that in terms of Israel. I think as an entity, as a country, if you want to call them that, they are in rapid decline and free fall.
In fact, I think it's important for people, as we were talking about Zionism, to understand that Benjamin Netanyahu's family name is not Netanyahu. It's oh shoot, I just lost it. It's a Polish name. Milikowski. His grandfather's name was Milikowski, and they Arabized their name when they moved to Russia. Golda Meir, her family name was Nedidich. So I bring up this point to say that, you've got folks that are arguing positions about land and property and lineage, and these folks are European. They're not from the region. They migrated to historic Palestine in the 1920s. And so when Benjamin Milikowski wants to argue a position of authority in historic Palestine, but he can only trace his history to the region to like 1923, juxtaposed or compared to people who have olive groves that are generations older than the Milikowskis have been in the region. And the same thing with Golda Meir. Your thoughts, Regis? Again, is this hyperbole or?
No, it's absolutely not. You're right. You're right on the money. There's another topic, we talk about Zionism, but I've done a great deal of research recently in the last few years, really, on Khazaria, the ancient Khazarian people that go back to between the year 1000 and 800, and then they were expelled from the region by Russians and their neighbors, and they have actually become what we call Zionists today, and they're referred to as the Khazarian Mafia. A great deal has been written. If any of your guests just have to go to Google and do searches on the Khazarian Mafia, their history, their origin, and who they are today, it will be a very striking.
How do you spell that?
Khazarian, Khazarian.
One more time. Khazarian,
Khazarian or Khazars.
Okay.
It's an amazing history, and their impact and their influence on the global situation today.
And Cherie says, please understand who Donald Trump's mentor was, lawyer Roy Cohn. And yes, folks, look up Roy Cohn, who was also a mafia. He really made his bones as and I use that term intentionally. He made his bones as a mafia attorney, and also as working with J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. And so what I think is appropriate for us to do. Oh, one more quick question for you, going back to the Ukraine issue, because there's a story in, again, I think it was the Washington Post today, quickly, and this is about North Korean troops being used to fight in Ukraine. And I talked with Mark Schleboda about this. I've talked to Mark about this a couple of times, and Mark says it's a totally bogus story, but it keeps getting repeated. And one of the things that Mark says is, he says you have to understand the size of Russia and that there are a number of ethnicities that are encompassed in Russia, and that not all Russians look like Vladimir Putin, and that there are Asian Russians that, you know, that are being mistaken as for being North Korean. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. There's 185 or 187 different ethnic groups living in Russia, united by one major thing, the Russian language, Russian history. Now, I saw a really interesting meme just the other day talking about these supposedly North Korean troops, 10,000 of them that are fighting in Ukraine. And the meme said, Kim Jong-un has created an invisible army that's fighting in Ukraine.
and they take their directives from the Death Star.
Yeah, right. And so that's my answer to that.
And again, folks, I want to reiterate it from my perspective, and I'll let Regis speak for himself, that this is not a pro-Russia, anti-Russia, pro-US, anti-US conversation. It's the fact, as Joe Friday would say from Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And then you guys can take the facts wherever you want to take them. But I'll quote Malcolm and then I'm done. If my telling you the truth makes you angry, don't get mad at me. Get angry at the truth. Regis.
I'll end on that note. I think this is not pro-Russia. It's not anti-Russia. It's not pro-America. What you are doing, what I am doing, and what so many others in the alt media are doing is searching for the truth. And unfortunately, when the truth is discovered and it's held up, it's a very difficult pill to swallow.
So, Regis Tremblay, folks, sharpen your pencils, mark on your calendars. Regis is going to join us on Friday. We're going to pick this up, and we're going to transition the discussion from where we are right now in Ukraine to where we are right now in the Middle East. Is that a deal, Regis?
It's a deal. I'll be there.
Man. Happy New Year to you. Thank you so much, Regis. I greatly, greatly appreciate your time today. Shelly H., thank you so much for that super sticker. If I didn't announce it earlier, I greatly, greatly appreciate that. And Happy New Year to you, Regis, and we will see you on Friday.
Thank you very much. And we're only a few hours from the new year.
That we are, my man. I got to thank Regis Tremblay for joining me today. Thank you all so much. I think we're now up to 4,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much. Or is it? I think it's 4,000. 4,000 subscribers. If each of you reach out to 2 people and convince them to subscribe, that'll keep this show afloat for 2025. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer. No, it's not 4,000. It's 6,000 because we had 5,000 the last time. It's 6,000. 6,000 subscribers, not 4. Stay tuned for new episodes every day. We will be off tomorrow, New Year's Day. We will be off Thursday. We will return Friday. Regis Tremblay will be the guest. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. You can follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Happy New Year. See y'all in 2025. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a great one. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.